Welcome back to another episode of Built and Backed. Joining me today is Devika Sarin, the founder of Soul, an app making art discovery a daily ritual for millennials and Gen Z. Her path into entrepreneurship blends a multidisciplinary background, beginning in economics, investment management, an MBA in London, and several years consulting on M&A, diligence, and strategy. Soul is her second startup in the art tech space, built from a deep belief that creativity, ritual, and storytelling can change the way people see themselves and the world. They just need permission to jump in. Devika, welcome to the show.
Hi, Ashley. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course, as we were chatting before we began recording, I've had several people recommend Devika to me as a potential guest. So I am so excited to have you on and share everything that you've been building with Soul. And so that's where I'd love to start off, is having you share more about who you are and what you're building.
Yeah, thanks. As you kind of mentioned, Soul is looking to make art discovery a daily ritual. The goal of what we're building now and kind of my entire journey as a founder has been around making the art world more accessible to younger people who feel excluded, intimidated, or lack confidence around getting involved in this space. My background is in finance. I don't actually have a traditional art background, but my grandfather was a collectibles and jewelry dealer. My dad had done some work in the space. So, as a family, we've kind of been surrounded by collecting, storytelling, people who have very strong eyes and aesthetics. And it really kind of formed a lot of the way that I view objects and how we can bring beauty into our daily life. And through my first startup, really got very closely involved in a lot of the pain points for younger people, specifically again around needing hand holding when looking at artists, and needing more information and context, because ultimately a lot of people who feel excluded didn't really grow up in the around the space. Their parents didn't collect, they didn't go to a lot of museums, but there's definitely a strong interest in learning more about the art space. So, Soul really kind of tackles that head on using AI, trying to help people figure out their taste, get to know a bit about them, and then really introduce them to artists that they may recognize or might not know about that are working and producing some really beautiful works across like prints, digital posters, paintings, really trying to build that infrastructure to help people go from interested to involved.
I love that. And it makes me wonder too, would you say that you kind of have like two groups that you're serving, both the people who are would like to get more into art and then also the artists with helping them get found, or is it primarily focused on like that end user, I guess is the best way to put it?
Yeah, ultimately it's both. But from my experience and the work that we're doing, by focusing on the end user, we're able to better serve the artist by helping them communicate themselves, present themselves, market, and better match to what a user is looking for. Because a lot of the other art platforms do a really great job serving up and matching artists to people who know what they want. But if you don't know what you want, there's a little bit of extra steps involved. And so by helping users, we're ultimately empowering artists as well
Mhm.
to better, build their fan base and find the people that really resonate with the message and kind of ethos of their work.
Absolutely. And so, one question I have for you based on that is I know you mentioned that Soul uses AI to help people understand like what types of art they're interested in or what really their style or taste is. And so, I'd love to hear more about that, like what that process is like of using AI and how it looks to the user of Soul who is doing that.
Yeah, so we have like very interesting kind of models that we're working on. I think by the time this podcast launches, the app will be available for people on our wait list. And so you can get a better idea of kind of the feature sets that we're working on. But really, we're serving up a certain amount of artwork for people to take a look at every day. Like the goal for us is that you're coming to Soul as a space to learn, feel inspired, and discover. And then the AI that we use is all to help guide you, communicate, and deliver kind of that context. And then, like many, AI platforms with personalization, we can better get to know the user and the artist, again, to help better kind of create this ecosystem where people are learning, reflecting, sharing, engaging, and then ultimately figuring out what they want from the art space in general. I think that's a big thing too for people who are new to the space is they might not be ready to buy or be a collector, but they definitely want to get involved and see what's out there for them. So that's kind of where the AI makes it possible to do what even in my first company we couldn't do, which is kind of the I guess the cool thing about AI is that it's making a lot of these industries accessible that once before you required a lot of time, money, or guidance to access.
Definitely, yeah. And I think it one of the from what it sounds like what you shared that one of the best benefits about Soul is like removing that analysis paralysis where I feel like with art it's like there's just so many options and so many styles and even I guess like the type of art like you shared poster or like an actual print or whatever it might be. So I can imagine that people just are like, I don't even know where to start. And so being able to use something like Soul to guide them through that process and as you mentioned, like hold their hand through it, I think is such a big benefit.
Yeah, thanks. And I definitely it's resonating with a lot of people because like you just said, there's overwhelm, there's too many choices, and also there's again like the need for that additional information to even start to think about what you actually want when you find an artist that you like. So that's why we're focused on discovery because once you really connect to the type of art or the theme or the artist themselves, then you're naturally encouraged to try and think about like what exactly you would want from that artist, what you want in your home. Maybe you just want to have the experience of that kind of interaction with the artist. So yeah, I think it's really important, especially again, like for younger people who feel a little bit lost to have that extra guidance because it really does go a long way to again, like just continue to give people the confidence and permission that will naturally come flow from that.
Totally. And this may have been something you've already mentioned, but is there a community aspect to Soul where users could communicate with one another or potentially add on that community aspect if there isn't one already?
Yeah, that's something we're thinking through. Obviously, community is a major buzzword, and it's also something that's so important for any consumer product. You need to be able to think through the space where people can actually come together and meet with people in the same path, journey, like-minded interests. And so we're thinking through what that looks like. We don't want to build a social media app. So, for us right now, the community connects through a newsletter, through social media. We're thinking through like what kinds of online or offline activations we can build in to the experience because that's also very important to how we build the market for our product because ultimately too for me it's more about a movement around art as ritual, art as a space for connection and healing,
Mhm.
and that happens multiple moments throughout the day, not just when you're on the app, but the app kind of facilitates the pathway to being able to notice more, and then having that community support you through that noticing is definitely important to us.
Absolutely. And as of the time of this episode, Soul will be recently launched. And so I would love to hear about just your journey as a founder. And of course, this is like your second startup. So I'd love to hear the second time around how that has been different. If there's anything, any new challenges that you've come across that you didn't experience in the first way, or just kind of how this has been different from your first startup.
The yeah, it's funny. It's very different from my first go at it. I feel like the founder, naivete that exists the first time around is very true. You don't know what you don't know, and you jump in, and I felt luckily like very supported. I was just coming out of an MBA program. I had a network in London that was behind me, very supportive family, friends, and had a vision that really resonated with the people that I was meeting. So that kind of carried a lot of my initial enthusiasm. But what wasn't there, which is there now, is more of the self-awareness of myself as a leader, individual, operator. I kind of had to unlearn a lot of the ways of being and working from finance, corporate, traditional structure. I'm someone that needs a lot of kind of guidance and containers to stay on track. So when it was kind of like up to me and what I could do all day, every day, that was a really big challenge for me the first time around. So this second time, I'm really interested in what systems can we set up. Like I think very differently about what people I want to have join Soul as well, because the first time around, I think I was very open to any and all help, which I still am. Like you, I know I'm grateful for anybody that believes in what we're doing, but this time, yeah, it's just more important to be more clear on boundaries and intentions. And I really do feel like the founder journey, which I hear some people talking about more, which I like, but the founder journey is in itself a spiritual journey. There's so much that you uncover about your own, limitations, strengths. And so if you're aware that that's going on, then you can better kind of dig into different areas that you want to work on, which again, I'm way more aware of now. The first time I ran into a lot of roadblocks, but I didn't do a ton of reflection. So it just kind of, was something that was building. Whereas this time, yeah, definitely much more intentional.
Yeah, and I mean, you worded it perfectly. You don't know what you don't know. And it's like sometimes you kind of have to figure those things out just by doing it. But I'm also a
Mhm.
believer, and it sounds like you are too, of this mindset of like failure is learning. So it doesn't necessarily have to be like a big failure, but even just something small that might not have worked out or something that didn't go as you hoped it would. It's good intel and insight into how to do things differently the second time around. And so it sounds like that's really the approach that you've been taking with Soul. And again, really just love that like self-awareness piece. I think having that as a founder is a really good quality to help keep you moving forward.
Definitely. I feel like it should be a prerequisite because yeah, the experimentation piece is so important, I think. And I feel like some other founders I talk to who come from traditional corporate roles have a bit of perfectionism and not wanting to make the wrong decision or do the wrong thing when they're building. But again, like, yeah, just reminding yourself that it's all play and experimentation. And that's the point of a startup because you're doing something nobody's done. So you kind of have to create your own rules. And that's really something I've worked a lot to lean into the second time around is that concept of no rules. I mean, it's very easy to fall into a path that you think you should take because of what everybody else is doing in the venture world, especially if you're looking to get venture capital and you're taking advice. Like I was very, um, I don't want to say easily persuaded, but I definitely took on other people's advice much more um, freely the first time around. Whereas this time around, I try to root more in my expertise, my intuition. I still obviously am learning, so I have great advisory and support and still seek out different resources, but I have a different filter. And so, yeah, I think that's where the self-awareness also comes back into play, where you just kind of learn to trust your gut a little bit more
Mhm.
and really try to remember that everybody is kind of going at the same place. So you just have to remember that you can kind of try anything and if it doesn't work out, you try something else.
Definitely. And on the topic of trusting your gut, which I think is another really good quality to have as a founder, is just that like intuition and knowing when to lean into it. But my question with that is if you found that while building Soul, if you ever had a moment where you had to pivot or if there was a challenge that came up that you weren't expecting and how you were able to move past that.
Yeah, I've pivoted many times actually on the journey to going from Art of Kindness, which is my first company, to now Soul. There's a lot of learnings that come from talking to customers. And the more you can talk to them and actually ask what they want versus like sharing what you're thinking about, that was kind of, I wouldn't say it's not a mistake. I'm glad I talked to a lot of people about what we were actually designing the first time around, but it became a little bit of an echo chamber where it was like, this is cool. This sounds cool. I would definitely use it versus trying to lean more into actually asking people what they would pay for, what they actually see as a gap in their current experience of doing the thing that you want to bring to life. So that was a big challenge, was just kind of working through better interviews, really better like customer discovery, better um, fact collection and data collection, and then learning how to actually figure out what to apply to the product that you're building. Because again, people also don't know what they don't know. And so they'll say, yeah, that sounds great. I definitely want this feature, that feature. So I think pivoting is, it can be something as small as your strategy, or it could be a much larger product pivot. But that's another place where gut plays a good role, where you start to collect as certain types of feedback, and then you have a natural inclination to say, oh, actually, I need to look at this a little bit more seriously, or think about this in the product development, which is again like where intuition and experience kind of work together. And then I think in some of the more qualitative feedback, or I guess more areas where, again, you as the founder might have more experience, then that's a place where I might lean in more to my intuition, where I then try to say, these are all interesting kind of data points, but ultimately this doesn't align with the vision of, kind of where we see things going.
Yeah, and actually that's a good point too, is sometimes I wonder if founders as they're building their startup, if they focus too much on like the wrong data point or like the wrong metric that might be really impressive, but then it's like, well, is this really what matters most, if that makes sense?
Right, for sure. And, just talking when you were asking me about a challenge and just thinking through like pivoting, we got a ton of data and feedback around like more of a marketplace model and serving artists with their problems. And I went kind of deep into that because I was like, that makes sense. A lot of people keep talking about it.
Mhm.
But ultimately, that was further away from the vision of what we wanted to build in the first place, which was still a need. It was just happened to be, three people giving the same feedback at the same day on the same day,
Mhm.
that can influence. So, yeah, it's definitely very difficult in the early days to learn to, like, yeah, trust yourself, and then remind yourself that you can't really make a wrong decision. You kind of just have to keep going with the information that you have, because I know people talk a lot about speed of execution, but I think it's also just kind of speed of movement, like just compounding learning and trial and error and experimentation can still get you the answers that you're looking for.
Yeah, I love that. No wrong decision. That's a really good way to phrase that. And one thing I'd like to ask you about as well is I know that you have Renew Venture Capital as an investor, and so I'd love to hear more about your investment journey, about like how you knew when it was like the right time to look for funding and how you knew that they were the right fit to support you. Because I think that's one thing a lot of founders potentially struggle with is like knowing which investor is the right one for them, for their vision, for what they're building, and making sure that they're aligned in values and whatnot.
I think it's tough because if you're building a tech product, and I'm a non-technical founder, it felt very urgent to have funding like right at the beginning, because a lot of what I wanted to build required skill set outside of my own, especially when I started. Now, today there are some tools, that can help people come up with MVPs or wireframes or concepts much more quickly, which is awesome. So, I think I definitely put emphasis on investors very early on in my founder journey, and perhaps would have been better served to focus on just building community and getting more data for myself rather than getting data for a specific type of investor. But it's really hard, at least it was for me. I intuitively knew that I shouldn't. I got a lot of feedback saying I shouldn't, but you almost have to like run through the fire and do it yourself and get the meetings and get the feedback. And because I had worked in finance before and on like the investment side of things, I feel like I had um, a good background in being able to communicate with investors. So it was definitely more natural for me to think about what would be a good alignment from like an investment point of view. And then again, like just figuring out what type of company I wanted to build, what type of founder do I want to be, thinking through more about what my lifestyle would look like, how my days would go. That helped also narrow down what kind of investor would be a good fit for Soul. And Renew is, I got connected to KT, one of the partners at Renew, through Old Girls Club, which is a community. And, you know, our first conversation was very different from a lot of the conversations I had had with previous venture investors. And so it was really refreshing for me to feel like someone was recognizing my personal identity, my process, my background, and more of the why behind what I was building rather than the focus on, okay, what's your projected milestone? How much, what's your runway? The standard like traction questions, which are important. But I felt like at least with Renew, they're more interested in the longer term impact and the mission behind what I'm building. So it felt much more natural, honestly. Like even talking to the other partners and the hours of conversation that we had, it was all like talking to a collaborator or a friend, someone that really understood what we were trying to do.
I love that way of phrasing it, like having them as a collaborator slash friend. And I think, again, just going back to intuition, I love that that's been like such a theme of this episode. But like once you get that gut feeling that it's the right investor, it's like you should act on it.
Yes, because a lot of this is again like going back to this thing I think about with no rules. Like it's really up to you and what serves you best. Because if you're a solo founder, or even if you're a co-founding team, you guys are you're the representation of the entire business. The business is an extension of you, who you are, who you surround yourself with. So I think it's for me, that's just so much more clear now. So I think that's why the intuition and kind of the more personal experience plays a larger role in the entire process. Because I also I'm very passionate about thinking through and sharing with other founders ways to make founding a business less of a painful process, like you can't eliminate the pain and the suffering, but you can shift the way that you view the thing. So it's not so intense and so every decision is not make or break, or like your identity is not so wrapped up in the thing that you're building, which is really hard to separate. So it's something that I'm, yeah, definitely in this season of my life is like very top of mind for me.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And the next question I have for you is geared towards your advice for other founders who are potentially also building an app and focusing on one of the most important things that comes with that, which is building a wait list. And so I'd love to hear how you were able to build a wait list for Soul, and then also how you were able to keep the people on the wait list nurtured and like keeping them engaged before, or I should say leading up to when you launched.
Yeah, that was actually, I think I had the benefit of building a company in this space before. So we had a lot of like supporters that we could tap back into in terms of community that would be interested in what we're building. We also have a newsletter where we do artist interviews. More recently, we pivoted into a more steady weekly kind of issue where we're talking more about like creative inspiration, artworks, anything that's going to help people tap back into feeling and connect with art in a different way. So I think having some sort of steady outreach or communication is important. And again, like going back to, you as the founder and the extension, like I I did a lot of the marketing, social media, newsletter writing myself. I've had some awesome interns help out along the way, but ultimately, like I had to figure out what way was the best for me to stay consistent, which I still, I'm learning at and didn't always do the best job. But like newsletter felt very natural for that. We relied on Instagram. We also really connected with awesome artists who became natural ambassadors and shared soul with other artists, and our newsletter grew through a lot of referral as well, just kind of sharing more about what we're doing with other people. So that was a great pathway. We also experimented with a lot of in-person stuff. Like, one summer I was in New York, I basically spent a few days hanging out in Washington Square Park where people were painting, chalk art and on the street. And I was asking people like, hey, handing my phone, like, do you want to sign up to my wait list? We had hung up flyers recently in New York City, in-person events, so different kinds of activations to raise awareness. Especially in the early days, it's easy to spend money, but I was also kind of interested in more about what our language was, what would kind of resonate with people around the value proposition. So yeah, just thinking through more of the ways to facilitate that connection, I think is really helpful for a wait list, especially because people do, yeah, I think they just expect a lot more communication. That doesn't mean, we're not every day or anything. Some people are every day, multiple times a day. I think where you are in your company journey might be better to figure out like what cadence works for the
Yeah.
team.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Thinking about the cadence and then also something you touched upon, which is like looking at multiple outlets for building your wait list. So not just only focusing on one channel, such as just social media, but you did everything from referrals to social media to in-person events and whatnot, and really diversifying your efforts to get the most results and make the most impact.
Yeah, and I think that's all. I mean, today I feel like it's much more like you need to be on TikTok, and that platform really is proving to be very beneficial for consumer founders to grow waitlists and community. But I still feel like, at least for me, again, like the type of person that I am, I needed to experiment with a lot of different things because we didn't have a lot of budget for marketing. So it was more, again, like just trial and error on a couple of different things. And we learned which avenues did better than others. And then now we have that data that we can utilize going forward.
Totally. And one question I have for you, which is geared towards any founder, but say that there's a new founder building a startup right now. What advice would you give to them for their journey to reach success and do something that means a lot to them?
Just one thing.
I know it's so hard to pick just one.
Yeah, but I guess maybe my advice is related to that. So one investor told me a couple of years ago to keep the main thing, which is really hard to do because when you're starting out, you want to do like 10 different things. But as a founder today, if I were starting out, I'd think through like if it's a consumer app specifically, like and you want to build community, maybe focusing on one channel that's going to help you get the information that you need. So if it's TikTok, then post, make a commitment to post like 2 to 3 times a day, stick with that channel. If it's a newsletter, focus on building and writing the best, most valuable newsletter that you can. If it's on customer surveys, then just spend time on your customer surveys and get the info that you need. So, yeah, just thinking through like what that main thing that's going to move the needle for you would be. Um, yeah, definitely something I wish I did more of. And I feel like the self growth and inner work is always beneficial, like no matter what you do as a founder.
Yeah, I love that advice. And now, one of my favorite questions to ask our guests is if you could give a shout out to anyone who's doing something cool in tech right now. It could be another founder, it could be a VC, community builder, anyone's fair game. I would love to hear who you're admiring lately.
Oh, it's a good question. And now picking one too. I feel like I have a lot of founders that I admire. Well, one recently actually. There's a founder. Her name is Jazz. She's building an app called Luna. They're based in the UK, and it's basically like a teen companion app, like the big sister that a lot of teenagers need for help with like physical and mental well-being, which I think is such an important space. But she does a really good job of like founder-led content, sharing her
Oh, nice.
journey on LinkedIn. She started the TikTok for their company as well. And they have hundreds of brand ambassadors. Like their whole TikTok is just other teen girls and teenagers posting their own content and talking about the app, which I think is really the, kind of North Star for a lot of consumers is when your users are the ones that are really kind of promoting you. So yeah, that's definitely a founder and a cool app to keep an eye on, I think.
Awesome. That's a good one. Devika, this has been such a fun episode, and I've so enjoyed having you on the show to share everything that you've been doing at Soul. And I'd love to have you share with our listeners where they can find you online in case they'd like to connect.
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. This was great. Appreciate all the good questions. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm most active there. We do have a Soul TikTok and Instagram too, which I can share the handle. It's just at This Is Soul. Soul is SOAL. And then our website has a contact form if anybody's an artist or a user that wants to reach out.
Amazing. And I'll include all those places in the show notes that our listeners can easily find you from there. But thank you so much again for coming on today's episode of Built and Backed.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ashley. Appreciate it. It was so nice to chat.